the skies above Toronto. The plane, Delta Connection Flight 4819, departed from Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, MSP. The flight left at 5:39 p.m. Central Time, CST, on February 17, 2025. A seemingly ordinary flight was about to descend into the realm of the extraordinary. The clock read 2:30 p.m. Passengers chatted calmly, unaware that they were moments away from experiencing one of the most miraculous survival stories in aviation history.
Ladies and gentlemen, in preparation for the landing, please fasten your seatbelts. Ensure that your tray tables are folded away. Your seat backs are in its upright positions, armrests are down, and your window blinds are fully open. All carry-on items must be placed underneath the seats in front of you.
What caused the crash? Could anyone have predicted this disaster? Was it the brutal winter conditions, the fault of the plane, or something much deeper, something extraordinary at work? On Monday, February 19, 2025, Delta Flight DL4819 would become the focal point of global news. But not because of the usual headlines. No, this time, there was no tragedy, no catastrophic loss of life. In fact, the miracle was that everyone survived. 80 souls defying the odds. How and why? Have you ever felt in total control of a situation, only to have something unexpected happen that leaves you feeling confused and disoriented? Pilots spend a lot of time briefing and preparing for various potential scenarios they may encounter. But what happens when something completely unanticipated occurs at the worst possible moment? In those cases, can the very preparation that was meant to help suddenly become a hindrance? This is the story of that day.
This is Trixie, your head flight stewardess. In command of the aircraft is Captain Daniel de la Proso, and assisting him in the control is First Officer Crisanto Cardeña. Please expect that we shall be flying for about 1 hour and 20 minutes.
The journey began like any other. Passengers sat comfortably, staring out the windows at the wintry landscape below. Flight DL4819 had departed Minneapolis at 1:30 p.m., heading towards Toronto Pearson International Airport. On board were 76 passengers and 4 crew members, the kind of numbers you'd expect for a short flight. But what came next would change everything. As the aircraft began its descent into Toronto, conditions were far from ideal. The snowstorm had subsided, but the winds remained fierce, and the runway was slick with the remnants of a frigid winter storm. Was it the weather? Or something else? At approximately 2:30 p.m., flight DL4819 made contact with the runway, but it wasn't a smooth landing. No. Instead, a violent thud echoed throughout the cabin as the wheels of the plane made a hard strike against the tarmac. The plane jolted violently, its descent much steeper than normal. Passenger Pete Carlson remembers it vividly.
It was a very forceful event, a deafening sound of concrete and metal. The plane dropped like a stone. The plane hit the ground and then everything just went wild. I felt the plane skidding. I thought we were going to flip.
The plane's left landing gear collapsed. The right wing scraped violently against the runway. Flames erupted from beneath the aircraft's belly. But that wasn't the end. The plane flipped upside down, losing its tail and an entire wing in the process. Now, here's where things take a turn for the unimaginable. Passengers weren't just shaken, they were trapped. Strapped into their seats, hanging upside down in the wreckage while flames threatened to consume the aircraft. Every second counted.
We were hanging from our seatbelts. It was as if gravity had forgotten us, pulling us into the ceiling. I thought, I might not make it out.
Flames licked the underside of the fuselage as the passengers scrambled, disoriented and terrified to release themselves. Some managed to unbuckle their seatbelts, only to find themselves crawling over luggage, desperately seeking a way out. Every instinct told them to run. But where? The ground was beneath them, above them. The world was upside down. But then something incredible happened. Instead of panic, there was cooperation. Humanity shone through the fear. Passengers worked together, guiding one another, finding strength in their shared struggle. No one was left behind. Passengers pulled themselves over the wreckage, helped each other up from the upside-down chaos. and evacuated to the snowy runway below.
I saw people helping each other in a way I never expected. We were all in this together. Everyone wanted to get out, and we helped each other do it.
We're in Toronto. We just landed. Our plane crashed. It's upside down. Fire department's on site. Upside down. Everybody, most people appear to be okay. We're all getting off. Some smoke going on.
In the face of disaster, the flight attendants, trained to keep order in the worst circumstances, became the unsung heroes. Swiftly and decisively, they guided the terrified passengers through the wreckage, ensuring they reached the exits, despite the danger that still loomed. The cause of the crash was not immediately clear. Why did the plane flip? What went wrong in those final moments? Investigation teams rushed to Toronto, carefully combing through the wreckage. The first breakthrough? The black boxes. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder had survived. They held the key to what had happened. But the real twist came when investigators listened to the audio recordings. There was no sign of panic, no distress calls. Nothing in the air traffic control exchanges suggested that trouble was looming. Aviation analyst Marco Chalin explained.
The pilot seemed calm, composed. The descent, however, was unusually steep. The plane made a hard landing, striking with one wheel first.
A hard landing, a collapsed landing gear. Was this the root of the disaster? The weather, yes, it was a critical factor, but was it the cause? Toronto's recent snowstorm had stopped, but wind gusts of 38 mph and a slight bump in the glide path were reported as the plane touched down. Was this the final push that sent the plane into chaos? The pilots attempted a crab maneuver, turning the plane into the wind and aligning it with the runway at the last second. But this maneuver, though often successful, was hardly foolproof in such harsh conditions. Did that contribute to the catastrophe? But what really defied belief was not just the strength of the aircraft, but its design. The plane had been engineered to protect its passengers in the worst of circumstances. The fuselage had remained intact, preventing further destruction. The seats, designed to absorb extreme forces, held steady under the crash's violent deceleration. Aviation expert David Susi revealed.
The plane's wings separated as they were designed to. This stopped the fuselage from tearing apart. The structural design worked, saving lives.
The unsung hero of the flight's survival, the seats. Designed to withstand up to 16 G of deceleration, these seats were able to remain anchored in place. They didn't detach, and passengers didn't fall to the front of the cabin. Each seat was a small fortress against the disaster unfolding. Kevin Campbell, FAA consultant, had to say this.
In previous crashes, we've seen seats pile up, but in this case, the seats stayed intact. That's the difference between surviving and not making it out.
The crash site was a scene of chaos. Emergency crews worked heroically, arriving mere minutes after the plane's dramatic halt. And yet, despite the devastation, there was something else at work. Survival. Only 21 people were initially transported to local hospitals. 19 of them would walk out just hours later. In the end, the story of Flight DL4819 was not just about a crash. It was about survival, about the resilience of the human spirit, and about design, engineering, and heroism working together to prevent what could have been a devastating tragedy. The string of air crashes in 2025 has rattled travelers. The Delta Airlines crash at Toronto Pearson International Airport on Monday is the latest in a series of accidents this year that has spread anxiety among air travelers and prompted sharp criticism of American aviation regulators. Let's take a brief look into two other major U.S. aviation accidents so far in 2025. The first major aviation accidents in 2025 takes us back to January as American Airlines jet and Army helicopter collide. On a chilling January evening in 2025, Washington, D.C.'s skies turned into a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered lives. As clear skies prevailed over the nation's capital, two aircraft, seemingly destined to collide, became part of one of the deadliest aviation tragedies in the U.S. in over 2 decades. The collision between an American Airlines jet and a U.S. Army helicopter sent shockwaves through the aviation community as it occurred in what is often considered the world's most controlled airspace. The tragedy unfolded around 9 p.m. on a Wednesday evening when American Eagle Flight 5342, a Bombardier CRJ-700 operated by PSA Airlines, was approaching Reagan National Airport. The plane, carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members, was just moments away from touching down on runway 33, one of the busiest and most well-regulated runways in the country. But the seemingly routine landing was shattered by an unexpected and catastrophic event. An Army UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter with a 3-person crew collided with the commercial jet. As the two aircraft collided, the sky was filled with a flash of fire and an explosion that lit up the darkened night. A trail of smoke followed as both aircraft plummeted toward the Potomac River. This violent encounter was captured in multiple sources of footage, from dashcams to the live webcam of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, a few miles from the crash site. Within moments, emergency units raced toward the Potomac, battling harsh winds, freezing temperatures, and the difficult conditions of the river. As night gave way to morning, the tragic truth became clear: there were no survivors. The powerful explosion had left nothing but debris scattered across less than a mile, and the wreckage of the plane's fuselage, now submerged in the waist-deep waters of the river, painted a grim picture. By Sunday, authorities had identified 55 victims, but many more remained to be recovered from the waters. The death toll, a staggering 67 people, would forever haunt the country, making this crash the deadliest in the U.S. since 2005. The investigation into what led to this devastating collision immediately began to unfold, with the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, leading the charge. The initial probe focused on one crucial question: how could something like this happen in the world's most controlled airspace? Both flight data recorders, black boxes from the American Airlines plane and the Army helicopter, were recovered in hopes of uncovering the events that led to the collision. Initial reports suggested a mishandling of flight paths, which were compounded by staffing issues at the air traffic control tower. The Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) report revealed that the controller on duty that night was tasked with duties that normally would have been divided between 2 controllers. This raised immediate concerns about the adequacy of staffing in such a critical area, especially considering the high volume of traffic around the airport at the time. Further investigation revealed that the Army helicopter, which had been on a training mission, had not followed the planned route that would have avoided the commercial plane. In a twist that added more confusion, a last-minute change in the American Airlines jet's landing path meant that the 2 aircraft were now on a collision course. The authorities were not yet ready to speculate on the cause of the crash, but the preliminary findings hinted at the possibility that human error and staffing limitations could have played significant roles in the tragic chain of events. In response to the collision, the FAA swiftly imposed new restrictions on helicopter routes into Reagan Airport, reserving them only for essential flights. The idea was to reduce the potential for future conflicts between military and commercial flights within the highly congested airspace. As the investigation continues, there is one undeniable truth: a disaster in the world's most controlled airspace has shaken the very foundations of aviation safety, and the scars will linger long after the wreckage is recovered. The world will never forget the day that 2 aircraft collided in the skies above Washington, D.C., and lives were lost in an instant, leaving questions that demand answers. But while the world was still in shock about the collision, a medical jet crashed in northeast Philadelphia, another tragedy that took the world by storm. The scene was surreal. On the evening of January 31, 2025, just as the sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon, a horrific tragedy unfolded in northeast Philadelphia. A Learjet 55, operated by Jet Rescue Air Ambulance, crashed moments after takeoff from northeast Philadelphia Airport, hurtling into the busy streets below. Within seconds, the jet ignited into a massive fireball, engulfing everything in its path. The crash, which occurred just minutes after the plane departed, would go on to claim the lives of 7 people on board and cause devastation on the ground, with at least 24 injured and 1 person killed. As the city grappled with the scale of the disaster, questions began to emerge about the cause of the crash, the impact on the community, and the status of the investigation.
And I've got 2 small children. I was absolutely scared. But I'm like, I need to find someone I can help.
What went wrong? How did a plane, which had barely lifted off the runway, plummet to the earth, leaving destruction and sorrow in its wake? This is the tragic story of the medical jet crash that sent shockwaves through Philadelphia. It was supposed to be a routine medical evacuation. The Learjet 55, a well-known aircraft in air ambulance operations, had been dispatched to transport a critically ill child, Valentina Guzman Murillo, from northeast Philadelphia to her home country of Mexico after completing a life-threatening medical procedure. On board were Valentina, her mother Lizeth Murillo Uzuna, and 4 other crew members: Captain Alan Alejandro Montoyo Perales, co-pilot Josué de Jesus Juárez Juárez, Dr. Raúl Meza Arredondo, and paramedic Rodrigo Lopez Padilla. The jet took off from northeast Philadelphia Airport at approximately 6:06 p.m. The night was clear and there was no indication of any mechanical issues before departure. The pilot had made initial contact with air traffic control and the flight appeared to be proceeding normally. However, as the jet climbed to around 1,600 feet, something went terribly wrong. Communications with the aircraft were lost. The air traffic controller made several attempts to re-establish contact, but the aircraft did not respond. Within a minute, the plane had disappeared from radar. At 6:10 p.m., the unthinkable happened. The plane plunged to the ground, crashing just yards from the Roosevelt Mall on Cottman Avenue. A fireball erupted on impact, sending plumes of smoke into the air. The devastating explosion left a massive crater in the ground, as debris from the aircraft spread across the surrounding area. The crash not only claimed the lives of everyone aboard the plane, but it also caused significant devastation on the ground. The explosion was so intense that it ignited several vehicles on the street. As firefighters and emergency personnel rushed to the scene, they discovered a horrific scene of destruction. Among the casualties on the ground was 37-year-old Stephen Druitt, a Philadelphia resident who was driving with his longtime partner Dominique and their young son. The family was en route to Macy's at the Roosevelt Mall when the jet crashed near them. Stephen was tragically killed on impact. Dominique suffered severe burns over 70% of her body and was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The couple's son, though injured, was fortunate to survive, though he required emergency brain surgery for a head injury. As the news of the crash spread, the neighborhood was thrown into a state of shock. The community was left reeling as details of the crash emerged. At least 24 people were injured, including several who were driving nearby when the explosion occurred. Among the injured was 10-year-old Trey Howard, who had been in a car close to the crash site. Trey was hit by flying metal debris and underwent surgery for a serious head injury. His family, although devastated by the accident, was relieved that Trey was alive and recovering at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. As authorities began to assess the damage and clear the wreckage, the question on everyone's mind was, what caused the crash? The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, quickly launched an investigation into the incident, and the first piece of crucial evidence was discovered just days later. On Sunday, February 2, investigators recovered the black box from the plane, including both the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, EGPWS. These devices, which record crucial flight data and cockpit conversations, could provide key insights into the moments leading up to the crash. U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, who visited the crash site on February 3, emphasized that the investigation would be thorough and transparent. "We have agreed to be as transparent as possible with information as it comes out," he said during a press briefing. "This is a substantial impact, and we want answers." At the heart of the investigation were several key questions. Why did the pilot lose contact with air traffic control so soon after takeoff? Was there a mechanical failure or an issue with the aircraft's systems? And perhaps most critically, why did the plane crash just minutes after takeoff in what appeared to be perfect weather conditions? As the investigation into the deadly medical jet crash continues, the community of Northeast Philadelphia remains on edge, waiting for answers. While the NTSB has yet to determine the official cause, the head of the Federal Aviation Administration, Christopher Rocheleau, had this to say as he addressed the country.
"I stand before you today with a heavy heart, acknowledging the recent tragic incidents that have shaken our aviation community. While these accidents are deeply sorrowful, I urge all passengers to remain calm and trust that we are actively investigating the causes. Safety remains our utmost priority, and we are working tirelessly to ensure our airspace and infrastructure are as secure as possible. We understand your concerns and are committed to making necessary improvements. Please know that we will emerge stronger, with enhanced regulations and systems to safeguard your travels in the future. Thank you for your continued trust.